questions about that? It's going to be the same thing, only a little longer as the other midterms. So your hands will hurt even more.
Is it in this classroom?
It's in this classroom at the same time. So everything's the same. Just pretend that Tuesday is really the last day of classes. Today is Thursday. We're going to have the last of the 5-minute essays today. I am pleased that already 7 of you have maxed out on the number of points you can get. Maybe if it isn't, I know there's a few people whose points are ambiguous, but it's at least 7, and a few more who can get to that maximum thing today. For the number of points you can get on out of 22 possible points, or 24 possible points, you can claim 20. Yes. The other thing I did was I forgot my power cord today because I'm an idiot, and then my battery will probably last for, well, I don't know, maybe the whole class, maybe not. That's why I'm not doing anything extra right now, because I'm afraid that I'm going to run out of battery power. Okay. But what we're going to finish off talking about, though, is, for sure, where we left off last time, talking about infanticide, and then we're going to sort of talk about siblicide as well. So,
what kind of computer do you have?
It's a Dell.
I have a.
You have a Dell PowerPoint? Well, that might come in handy. It's, I don't know.
It's all the same, I think.
Yeah, that looks the same. Yeah, well, that would be cool. And I'll power it up now and waste energy. Yeah, it looks the same. Yeah, it's cool. Otherwise. Hey, look at that. Okay. And then when we cover siblicide, I'll see how much time is left. And then we'll maybe talk a little bit about sex ratios. And I just don't know how much time there will be. But we'll see. We talked about infanticide in Coots, where it was parents killing offspring. Okay. And that really fits into the parental care business. But there's a lot of cases of infanticide that are not really precisely about parental care, but because it's about infanticide, I thought I would talk about infanticide, at one place during the course. And so there's some other kinds of other instances of infanticide that really have to do with, perhaps media, rather than parental care. Okay. And we have to start by looking at sort of the mating, parental care, birthing gestation process. And we'll think about this as mammals here. So this involves this thing that we've talked about before, postpartum estrus. Okay. In postpartum estrus, female gives birth and then very quickly comes into estrus the next day. And mating occurs right after birth. And after birth, the mom lactates until some point when the offspring are weaned. Okay. And then, once the offspring are weaned, she stops lactating. Okay. And at that point, the embryo, which is sort of like blastocyst gastrula, has been floating around in the lumen of the uterus. Now it implants. Because sort of pregnancy, really pregnancy is not something that is compatible with lactation hormonally, commonly. Okay. So gestation actually lasts this entire period. So birth takes place here. Okay. Technically, she's been pregnant for this whole time. Okay, but really the embryo was only implanted during at this point. Okay, so gestation period here encompasses the full lactation period. Okay. So the time it takes for lactation is much less than the time it takes for gestation. So L is less than G. Just point this out. Now, postpartum estrus sounds exotic to us, but it may very well be the ancestral mammalian breeding system. Okay. A little bit of question about that, but it's certainly a very widespread sort of thing. We are more familiar with this sort of pattern, where birth marks the beginning of this cycle, okay, and lactation takes place after birth. Offspring are weaned, okay, so lactation stops. There's a timeout that depends on the organism. It might be, depending on how big an organism, it might be a couple of weeks, it might be a couple of months, it might be a year or so. And then the female comes into estrus again, mating happens, and gestation, begins, and birth. Okay. For these kinds of organisms, the gestation period doesn't overlap lactation. Okay. And usually lactation is longer period of time than the period of gestation. So, there may be gestation for, a month or a couple of months, but lactation might take a couple of months or 6 months or a year or something like that, depending on organism. Okay. So there's these two sorts of things. Lactation is usually bigger than gestation, but it's certainly very different from what happens with postpartum estrus. Now, those two sorts of, I don't know what you call them, reproductive physiology strategies have very different consequences for the sort of probability that infanticide might occur. When lactation is much less, when lactation is much greater than gestation, when you have postpartum estrus, okay, there is very little likelihood that infanticide will occur. Okay, the offspring are born, okay, and mating takes place rapidly. And if there is any sort of infanticide that occurs, it doesn't do anything to the outcome of the pregnancy, because she's already mated right after giving birth. Okay, so there's no incentive on the part of anybody, and by which I mean males, to actually kill offspring. Okay. On the other hand, when lactation is much, much less than gestation, when lactation is much greater than gestation, you don't have postpartum estrus, and it is possible for a male who wishes to mate with his female to kill the female's offspring. What that does is terminate lactation, okay? Terminates the baby, but it terminates lactation. And that immediately starts that timeout period, which might be a short period of time. And then the female comes into estrus shortly thereafter, shortly after the male commits infanticide. And then that gives him an opportunity to mate with his female. This is something that happens, moderately commonly, but only in those cases where the lactation period is greater than gestation, when you don't have postpartum estrus. It happens, for example, in lions. When male lions are taking over a pride, they systematically go through the cubs that are present in the pride and kill them, one after the other. Just killed one. And now our buffalo problem here. one, as he's taking over, as he and his companions are taking over a pride from the previous males, they kill all of the dependent young, all the lactating cubs in that pride. That causes all of the females lions within that pride to come into estrus, more or less simultaneously. Okay, and it gives them a head start on fathering cubs in that pride. There's no sort of waiting for the mothers to continue to finish raising, finish lactating to raise the cubs. The males sort of short circuit that by killing all the dependent cubs. Okay. This is something that happens in lions, but happens in actually quite a few mammals. This is, yeah, I'm sorry.
Does that relate to interaction too?
You know, not really, except that in the sense that the male is not related to any of those cubs. And so there's no reason for him to want to hang on to those cubs.
So
Okay. Yeah,
Aren't there like a couple male lions in the pride?
right.
So it's the father,
What's that?
like the actual father of the cub, wouldn't he be upset about, wouldn't he try to stop that?
That's right, and that's why there's a couple of males, 2 or 3 males moving in, and those are, they're fighting with the 2 or 3 males who are resident and all of the fathers. And they kick out the residents, and by kick out, I mean usually kill the residents. And then they take over the pride and kill all the dependent cubs.
Just curious, so do the females don't care if their kids are being killed?
Yeah, they do care, but if you've seen the difference in size between a female lion and a male lion, males are like twice as big. They're enormous, you know, point of views differ, who's got control? It's usually the males. A bunch of females can fight off like a single marauding male who wants to maybe take over that pride. But usually it's like 3 or 4 males that are coming in.
Gotcha.
Okay. So here we're looking at a bunch of different mammal groups ranked by sort of the ratio of lactation to gestation. So long lactation compared to gestation, that would be a positive number. Okay, and these are logarithms, so they get a number greater than 1, so the logarithms would be a positive number. Okay. A long gestation period relative to lactation are those situations where you've got postpartum estrus. Okay, so this would be a number less than 1, and so you'd have a negative log. Okay, so they're ranked by, in a sense, the longest gestation periods compared to lactation and the shortest gestation periods compared to lactation. And these are different groups of mammals. So carnivores and pinnipeds, these are things like sea lions and elephant seals and walruses and those sorts of things that have postpartum estrus. They have a vastly longer gestation and lactation period. Okay. Rodents, these are like beaver-y like rodents. These are baleen whales. Okay. Artiodactyls are like antelope, lagomorphs, rabbits, parasadactyls. These are horses, for example. Finally, we get a situation where, you know, the relative amounts of, I guess, lactation and gestation are getting close to one another. The Saiuridae rodents are the squirrels. These are the toothed whales. Carnivores, discipeds, these are like dogs and cats, and hyenas and so on. Primates, that's us, okay? The groups with the eyes here are those groups where infanticide is something which is observed in some, not all, but in a number of species might be relatively widespread. So among horses, squirrels, toothed whales, dogs and cats, and primates. Okay. Primates, we have basically the largest lactation to gestation ratios. Okay. And infanticide is moderately common, actually occurs, fairly widespread among primates. And this is a mating strategy. Males are doing this in order to gain access to females, which they achieve by killing the female's dependent young. You can see this difference in primates maybe most clearly here. These are, again, in mammals. There's infanticide occurs, in non-primates, and the difference between the lactation and gestation ratios are different here. But you can see how much different they are in primates. Primates have very long periods of lactation, and that makes infanticide fairly. There's a lot of risk of infanticide. That make sense? Okay, infanticide. Yes?
Is infanticide only carried out by males?
In these cases, they are. These are carried out by males. As opposed to the coots that we talked about last time, where it's, infanticide by the parents of the young that are, present. This is the males to get rid of those young so that they can be with the females.
So whenever you have like an outside male coming into a group, the males are the ones who make the infanticide by the females.
Yes. That's invariably true. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about siblicide. This is a really common bird. It's common around here. This is the great egret. Stately bird that you see in the bayou, just down the road. They typically have 3 young. They very commonly have 3 young. And usually they produce 1 or maybe 2. Two of the young begin gaining up on the 3rd young after they all hatch. The parents have done this asynchronous incubation strategy so that there's an A and a B and a C chick. Okay. And the A chick is bigger, and the C chick is bigger, and the C chick is the smallest. And the A and B now actually start attacking. And with herons, they have a very sort of impressive weapon that they can use against their siblings, that beak, which they stab at their siblings with. And you see the 3rd chick commonly has this sort of like bald-looking appearance because the other chicks have started to pull out feathers on the head of the C chick, and it gets removed, further and further from the nest until it falls to the ground and dies. Okay, so the siblings kill it, and then typically there's a struggle for the 2 to reduce down to 1. So there's one chick that usually survives here. Okay, the siblings are killing each other. And not only that, while this siblicide is occurring, the parents are just standing by. They're not preventing the siblicide from occurring. They're just standing there watching it. To be fair, all of these parents were also siblicidal. So this is, something that all egrets are siblicidal Boobies, basically eagles. All eagles are suicidal. They kill their siblings. All pelicans are suicidal. Let's take a look at this video clip here.
Life for young pelicans can be equally brutal. As they grow, so do their appetites. No matter how hard the parents work, they cannot bring enough food for all three. The last to hatch was always smaller than the other two. It was always the last to be fed. And now the two older ones turn out. Now it will not survive. Its parents will not bring any food to it on the ground. And that's not the end of it. No sooner has one been pushed out of the nest than a second will follow until there's only one left. And that's what happens nearly always in a pelican's nest. That being the case, it seems rather inefficient, not to say heartless, that the pelican should always lay 3 eggs. But the reason is that it's partly an insurance policy. In case something terrible happens to 1 or 2 of the chicks, there's always a third left to carry on. And partly because very rarely, when the fishing is very good, it is possible to raise more than 1 chick.
Those last 2 things are 2 of the biggest hypotheses for why they do this. The first is the insurance chick hypothesis, which is that, something had happened to the first 1 or first 2, somebody eats it. It just, I don't know how it struck by lightning or something, and it just dies for whatever reason. There's somebody left kind of in the pipeline to actually be an insurance chick that can take over. Okay. The other idea is the sort of the resource bonanza hypothesis, that if you happen to have a really good year where there's a lot of fish available, that maybe you can raise 2, okay. Or maybe 3. The evidence suggests that it's probably more likely the insurance chick hypothesis than the food bonanza hypothesis. Let's take a look at some data for, it's white pelicans rather than brown pelicans, but same sort of thing. They lay, 1, 2, or 3 eggs. Okay. The chance that those eggs hatch is pretty much equal, in the 80%. So they have a pretty high chance of hatching, regardless of whether they're the first or the third chick to egg to lay. If you look at the number that survive to the creche stage, which in pelicans, a lot of these kinds of birds, the creche is where the sort of youth penguins go and hang out with other penguins of the same age. So it's kind of a young penguin nursery, but they're not dependent on anybody, but they all hang out together at the same age. Okay. The maximum number of eggs on average to survive from nests with 2 eggs. Okay. But it's not more than 1, it's 0.7 young that survive. And actually, if you have 3 eggs, you're likely to have more young surviving than if you had just a single egg. Okay. What it looks like is that those second and third eggs to be laid actually end up replacing the 1 or 2 other chicks that are lost. for other reasons. Okay? And it's very rare, it's like 1% of the time, that the nest of pelicans, at least white pelicans, ever produces more than one chick. So 99% of the time, they're not taking care of, they're not taking advantage of some sort of bonanza of food. That just really doesn't happen much. Okay? They're only producing maximum one, or one chick. So it's really pretty much an insurance chick. The parents are producing in order to sort of buffer the possibility that they lose one of those other chicks for other reasons. Okay? Does that make sense? Insurance chicks. Which I guess makes you, when you think of offspring as just sort of insurance, again, it kind of reinforces the notion that, parents are engaged in sort of producing young and engaging in parental care in order to maximize their own success. Let's try to think about how an organism might evolve something like infanticide or siblicide, and we'll try to show some of the similarities in these two things.
So,
I'm sorry.
for the last slide, the number of surviving young, it gets bigger as there's more eggs?
Well, it gets its maximum at 2 eggs. I mean, it's 0.7 is not much bigger than 0.6, but but it never goes above 1. So they're not getting, they're not doing the second thing that Attenborough talked about, which is occasionally they're able to raise more than one young. I mean, 1% of the time. That's true.
But wouldn't it be better if they just had one egg?
Well, they might die for other reasons. Maybe a fox gets into the nest, eats the eggs, eats the chicks. Some other, neighboring pelican comes over and kills your offspring. Now what? Wait till next year. Okay. But if you had a insurance chick, maybe you're gonna do okay. Yeah.
Do you ever have infanticide and siblicide?
Do you ever have infanticide and siblicide together? It's sort of like a dreary thought, but I don't know of a case, but it wouldn't surprise me if you did. And we'll see why in maybe a bit. Okay? Because we're going to think about why, under what circumstances might we expect siblicide, or under what circumstances might we expect infanticide. I think I'm going to just skip this because I just okay. When should you commit infanticide? As a parent. Okay? As a parent. Because you're the ones doing this. And, the simple and unilluminating idea is when the payoff to being infanticidal is greater than the payoff to not being infanticidal. How can we calculate those payoffs, though? Let's suppose we've got this situation. Number of offspring, down here on the x-axis, and we're going to look at the per capita payoff to producing a particular number of offspring. So if you produce, 2 offspring, you get a certain payoff. And if you produce 3 offspring, you get a different payoff. Okay. It has to look something like this in order for us to understand how infanticide could evolve. And that's because we're assuming that fewer offspring have to be producing greater per capita payoff than more offspring somehow. If it was flat or it went up, you couldn't get infanticide. Okay, so you have to have this sort of a situation. So let's suppose we've got this number of offspring. It's n. Okay? And when we do that, we get a payoff of S of n for each of those n offspring. Okay? But if we kill one, we have now n minus 1 of them. But we have raised the per capita payoff to this value, S sub n minus 1. Okay? Everybody's okay with that? Or see this? Okay. So how do we figure this out? The payoff to being infanticidal or non-infanticidal is raising all n of those offspring and getting a payoff of S sub n. Payoff to being infanticidal, provided you're only killing one, is n minus 1 times this smaller number times this higher payoff. Fair enough? Okay, we'll just rearrange it and put it in this term because this is something that will recur. This ratio of payoffs to the two offspring sizes has to be greater than n over n minus 1. What does that look like? It looks like this. Okay. Several things to talk about here. This is that ratio, S over n, S n minus 1 over S n is greater than n over n minus 1. That's this line here. Okay. First of all, everybody who's up here, the conditions that are up here, favor infanticide. This is a situation where this is true, this if-then statement is true. Infanticide is favored up here. Down here, you shouldn't get infanticide. And that line is where those two things are equal. Obviously, you don't have infanticide if you only have a single offspring because, well, that can't ever work out, basically. Kill the only offspring that you have. If you've got two, it says that payoff has to be twice as great. And that makes sense, right? That if you're going from 2 offspring down to 1 offspring, that 1 offspring left over has to be worth more than twice as much as those 2 offspring. Okay? So it intersects here at 2, and it declines. So by the time you get out to 10 offspring, the ratio is not very great, 1.1-ish. So that means it gets easier and easier to commit infanticide as you get to larger and larger numbers of offspring. If you're a coot and you're out here 10, 12 offspring, the effect that killing one of those offspring has doesn't have to improve the survival of your remaining offspring all that much. It's a pretty easy barrier to overcome. And if you've got 100 offspring, which organisms do, it becomes actually pretty easy indeed to kill off some of your offspring because it might increase the success of the remainder. That make sense? Okay. Let's think about symbolism. It's more complicated because now we have to ask a baby bird, when should it kill one of its siblings? Okay. When we're talking about infanticide, okay, from the parent's point of view, all of those siblings are sort of genetically equal. They all have half of the parent's genes. Okay, there's nothing to distinguish between them. That's why it was easy to just go from n to n minus 1. With a sibling, they don't consider everybody to be equal among siblings. Siblings value themselves more than they value their siblings. one individual that values itself more than it values a sibling. Okay? It's worth more to itself than a sibling is worth to that individual. How do you think about that? There's a direct effect that siblicide has. Okay? There's the effect that killing a sibling will have on its own success. You know, that S sub n. And there's an effect that killing a sibling will have on the surviving sibling's success. And that's indirect because it's not happening directly to that check that we're talking about. There's direct and an indirect, and they look like this. So if you look at a group of siblings without siblicide, they are interpreting the payoff as within individuals in the house. They're getting this payoff as sub n. That's the payoff that they get for themselves. The other n-1 individuals are their siblings. And their siblings are also getting that S sub n payoff. But they don't care about that as much, the payoff to one of your relatives, as much as they care about the payoff to themselves. How much do they discount a benefit to a relative compared to the benefit to themselves? And siblings are related to one another by a half. So if something benefits me by a certain amount, and it benefits my sibling by a certain amount, I don't care about part of that amount. I only care about half of that amount because I only share half of my genes in common. So I take half and pay off to my siblings. Okay. So now it commits siblicide. And it gives a higher payoff, a direct effect, higher direct payoff to itself, but it also gets a higher indirect payoff. So now it's killed one, and there's n-2 siblings left, but it only counts them by a factor of 1/2 as much. So, when should this be greater than that? A little more algebra, and it leads to this same ratio, S n-1 over Sn. Instead of being greater than n-1 over n, it's n plus 1 over n. Okay? Now it looks like this. This is the infanticide curve. Okay? And this is the siblicide curve. Instead of intersecting here at 2, it intersects here at 1.5. Okay? If one of two individuals commits siblicide, okay, it's killing that sibling, but it only counts half as much as itself because it's a sibling, not itself. So it only goes up to 3 halves. It has to be a 3 halves. And it declines in the same way. So couple of things to observe. First of all, for a very large portion of this space here, both the parents and the siblings agree that somebody should be killed. Parents think it's okay to have infanticide, and the siblings are in favor of siblicide. They're both above both curves. They also agree that nobody should be infanticidal and nobody should be sibblicidal below both curves. And there's a little bit of a place where there's a disagreement, where parents would disagree with their offspring about whether or not somebody should be killed. Parents don't favor siblicide. Parents don't favor siblicide. Offspring favor. Parents don't favor infanticide, but offspring favor siblicide. So there's an small area of disagreement. And it's easier the bigger the group of siblings that you have. The more siblings you have, the more likely it is for one sibling to give you full another. Okay. That make sense? Maybe, maybe not. I sort of see some expression. Let's get into the issues here.
I don't really get a ratio.
That's just how the math turns out. The algebra, this ratio here. This is the ratio of how the payoff is for a group where somebody has been killed compared to a group where nobody's been killed. So we go back, it's just, in a sense, this slope, really, if you think of it that way. It's the difference between how much bigger this is compared to that. If it was smaller, of course, then you can't have suicide, or infanticide.
So if you back to the graph we just saw. So if it's Sn minus 1 divided by Sn is 2, is that saying it's twice as advantageous to fill out?
That would say that that's the threshold for, in the case of infanticide, for killing one of your two offspring. That remaining offspring has to be twice as valuable as when you had two offspring. You had two offspring, they're valued a certain amount, we'll call it 1. When you kill one, you've lost one of that value, so the other one has to be a value of 2. The remainder has to be a value of 2.
And the more kids there are, the less that goes down.
Yeah, it goes down to nearly 1. It'll approach 1 as this n gets really big.
Okay, and then the bottom one, 1.5, is siblicide?
Mm-hmm. So the bottom one's siblicide, and the reason it's easier to kill a sibling is because the loss of a sibling is not as important to you. It's only worth half of the value that you have, that you place on your life. Because we're talking about it from the point of view of those offspring. And in infanticide, we're talking about it from the point of view of the parents.
You talked about where parents and siblings disagree. Where was that? In killing?
Oh, it's between the two. So up here, this is above the line here, parents are in favor of infanticide. Okay. Below that line, parents are not in favor of infanticide.
Wait,
But
say that
above
one more time.
this line, siblings are in favor of siblicide.
I'm sorry, I was right. Can you say that one more time?
Okay.
I don't understand.
Up here,
Yep.
what is siblicide favored or unfavored? It's favored. What about infanticide? Okay. Down here, what's favored? Neither one. Okay. What about in this little space between the lines?
Siblicide's favored, but infanticide's unfavored?
Right.
Infanticide not favored.
Right, both of you.
So above favored, under unfavored.
Right, because above, that's when this value is greater than that value.
That makes sense.
So siblicide could be a good thing, I guess. What?
But according to the math, though, siblicide, one sibling is related to another sibling by 0.5
Mhm.
with the coefficient of relatedness. But then, isn't that the same for parent and offspring?
But they're all the same. So all of the offspring are the same. So that, you put a 0.5 in there, but they would cancel out. The difference is that one individual is related to itself by 1, and it's related to the others by 1/2.
So it's still better for one sibling to kill the other sibling rather than the parent for the parent kill the sibling.
Right. Now let's, so what if this was a case of polygyny? like in coots. Okay? Then the siblings are not related by a half anymore. Some of them are only half, there's half siblings in there. Where would the curve be?
Would be like 0.75, be half of what it's on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It'd be, if you're only considering half siblings, it would start here. And go down. So it's easier to kill a half sibling than it is to kill a full sibling.
Because the relatedness goes down.
Right, because they don't mean as much to you. And this also might be what's going on here, where you've got sort of extra possibility of having, you have greater amounts of those orange feather plumes in coots and their relatives that engage in a lot of polygyny, where that reduces, the relationship among all of those members of the coot family. It's easier to kill them. It's easier to evolve things that result in their death. Life is complicated. And not always, kind of brutal sometimes. Okay? All right. Let's do the last one here.
You got it?
Everybody got them? Everybody getting them? All right. Thanks. take another minute or so. Okay, pass them in. Okay, so what's the answer here?
The more time that the male spends with the female, the more sure he can be that the opposite sex and more likely to stay pregnant.
To give parental care? Okay, that seems complete. Any other additional parts to that?
It's a common trend in polygyny Kansas population.
Yeah, it could be. Depends on, it's certainly something in a polygynandrous situation you want to look at to see if something like that's going on. Okay, so this last part is in lieu of, the thinking about sex ratios, which is going to be the whole subject of today's lecture, but given the spent other time on other parts, this is the amount of time we have left. And basically, we've been talking about how parents invest differently in offspring. It might be anything from, and I've posted this, it's called Trivers Willard. Let me look at it. Parents might do things like lay those incredibly different sized eggs, or they might actually do things like produce different quality of milk from different nipples, okay, in mammals. They might engage in asynchronous, brooding and therefore hatching of offspring that ends up producing offspring of differing sort of sizes and survival probabilities. Or they might actually go out, directly and kill their offspring. Manipulating the quality, perhaps, of the surviving offspring. Parents might also invest differentially in the sex of their young. Now, there are limits to this because, as we know, everybody's got one mom and one dad, and so the genetic contribution through males to the next generation is going to be equal to the genetic contribution through females to the next generation. And so in the end, you tend to end up with equal numbers of males and females. Okay. And that's, however, true on a population level. A population level, there tends to be equal numbers of, pretty close to equal numbers of boy children and girl children. But it doesn't have to be true at the individual level. It can be that for an individual male or female, okay, it might be better for them to produce one sex or the other. They might produce males, or they might produce females. So, for example, what if big males are more successful? Maybe it's polygyny. Maybe it's like elephants, where these big males are the ones that are successful at monopolizing groups of females. Okay. Those big males have to be produced somehow. Here's some data for reproduction by bighorn sheep. Okay, female, male, baby. And here we're looking at the reproductive success of a male, the sire's annual reproductive success, how many babies he has per year. Okay? And it's from low to high. Okay? Not all males are equally successful. Okay? The ones that tend to be more successful are bigger and tend to be more, able to monopolize those females, or to be able to fight off other males. And this is the proportion of male offspring that those males have. Males with greater reproductive success produce more male offspring. And it's a pretty strong effect. Males with large reproductive success produce more male offspring. Why is that? Well, it could be due to the males, it could be due to the females. For example, body size might be a heritable trait. It commonly is that bigger parents give rise to bigger offspring. There could be a sort of genetic basis to body size. Big males have big fathers. Okay? And big fathers are going to have big sons. So maybe those big males are doing something, overproducing Y sperm instead of X sperm, maybe, I don't know, to alter the sex of their offspring. Or it could be the females who are doing this. Probably the females. Females bias the offspring sex ratio to males when they mate with a big male. Okay, and they mate with, because it is genetically based, it does have a heritable component. Their offspring are going to tend to be males, they're going to tend to be big males, and therefore they should be males, as opposed to they're going to be small, and therefore let's produce females. How could they do this? There's a whole variety of possible mechanisms. It could be selective abortion. Females would selectively abort male offspring when they've mated to a small male, or selectively abort female offspring when they've mated to a large male. It could be selective, could be selection of the sperm themselves. They might more likely allow a Y sperm to fertilize an egg when they've made it large, or let an X sperm fertilize when they've made it to a small one. Or some sort of bias at the level of allowing one sex or the other to implant. But there's obviously something going on here in terms of changing the sexes of the offspring. Another example here, brown anoles. Brown anoles. We have commonly around here native species of green anoles. brown owls are actually in town. I don't know if you've seen them around, but they've been introduced into the Houston area. Brown owls is a mating male and female. Brown owls are, again, the males are big and they compete with one another for access to females. This is a brown owl doing his dewlap this way. And they actually show a relationship between body size, again, of the male, the sire, and whether or not they're producing highly productive offspring. Okay. This is the body size of the male. So 0 here is the average size male. If they're above average, okay, let's just start again. This is the graph that shows how the fitness of the females, fitness of his daughters changes as a function of his body size. And there's not much of a change, except that little tiny males produce females that have virtually no fitness. And this is a graph showing how the size of the fathers influence the reproductive success of his sons. Males that are larger than average produce sons that are much more fit. They have much higher fitness. Males that are smaller than average produce females that are much more fit than the males and their sons. If you look at, for a given female, the body size of the sire of male that she makes with, if he is small, he produces more daughters. She produces more daughters than sons. If the body size of the male that he mates with is large, then she produces more sons than daughters. So here, again, it seems like the females are doing something to the eggs that changes the sex of their offspring to favor large males when they mate with a large male, and favors daughters when they mate with a small male. So they're investing differentially in offspring depending upon their sex. Okay. And it also depends then on the size of the male that she's mating. Okay. So big males are costly to produce. Perhaps it's true that only the females that are in the best condition should raise sons. This is something that's called the Travers-Woollard hypothesis. And it's a different way that you can get this differential investment into males and females depending upon certain other attributes. And it says that the costly sex should be overproduced by the individuals that are in better condition, because those individuals will be better able to pay the price and therefore produce these costly offspring. Now in mammals, we're usually thinking of the costly sex being males, and the individuals who are producing these offspring are females, but it doesn't have to be, the costly sex doesn't have to be males, and it doesn't have to be the females that are necessarily producing it. It depends on who's involved in the production of those offspring. If you have seahorses, maybe the males are much more involved in the production of the offspring. In the organisms I study, ants, the queens are much more costly to produce than the males. They're 10 times as big. So they're much more costly to produce. But in mammals, the thing we're sort of spending our time talking about here, it's usually the costly sex are the males because they're bigger, and they should be overproduced by females who are in better condition. Let's take a look at that costliness here. Okay. Males in general in mammals are a bit more needy, I guess, is how you might put it. They beg for food more commonly. They nurse more frequently. When they nurse for longer periods of time. They just cost more for a female to produce than females do. So sons are more costly to produce. Here's red deer. This is the sort of European duck. The bottom line here is that when a male is reared, a son, as opposed to a female, a daughter, okay, there's a much greater chance that the mothers will die. This is the observed compared to expected chance of dying for the mother. When they raise a daughter, okay, and it's because they just cost more to build. When females have to nurse these male offspring, their sons, more commonly and more frequently and to a greater extent, it puts them in lower condition when the harsh winter comes. And when the winter comes and they're going on to breed the next year, it's much more likely that they will have to delay reproduction by, a week or 10 days compared to if they raise a female calf. Okay, and that delay just makes it less likely for that, subsequent calf to survive and for the mom to survive. What you're seeing is that the mom has to take another couple of weeks to get into condition enough to actually produce an offspring. Okay. Males are more costly. If that's the case, what do we expect under the Travers-Willard hypothesis? That those females who are in better condition should concentrate on producing males. Those females who are in worse conditions should produce females. Okay. Here we're looking at not quite that, but it's leading up to that. This is the relationship between what happens to the offspring of a female depending upon her social status. So this is the social status ranging from lowest hierarchy rank to highest hierarchy rank. Those that have the lowest hierarchy rank have the lowest access to resources, including food and shelter and so on. Those that are at the highest rank have greater access to food and shelter and so on. See that? What we're looking at here is the lifetime reproductive success of an offspring who is born to a female with a particular social status. For females, it really doesn't matter what the social status of mom was. The offspring lifetime reproductive success is pretty much constant. For her sons, it does matter. There is a positive relationship between the male's her son's lifetime reproductive success and her hierarchy rank, her social rank. Higher ranking females overproduce males. Now, I'm hoping that people see this relationship to the other cases where we saw, condition-dependent strategies, where it might be mating strategies, although this is not mating. The strategy is, what sex should I produce? Okay. If we have a low-ranking female, what do we imagine the proportion of males would be? And when they're high-ranking, the proportion of males would be higher. And that's exactly what you see. Low social ranking females produce fewer percent males. This is 20% down here. And up here it's about 70%. So high-ranking females overproduce males. Okay, this is just like we saw saw with sex-changing organisms or alternative mating strategies that were sort of condition dependent. The condition dependence here is social rank. And what they're doing is changing the sex they produce. Yeah.
The more costly sex is the one that would consume more resources or require more attention after birth.
And also, it reduces her chances of survival. So it's costly in that terms as well.
It's more of an investment for the female. for the
Right,
long term.
exactly.
I thought like sex was random, so they have like mechanisms like internally that can decide how does that, the males, like the larger males produce more male sperm? I don't
Now,
know.
this is a question. The Trivers-Willard hypothesis, though, that there ought to be a relationship between, in this case, a female condition and sex ratio has been tested hundreds and hundreds of times. Part of it, though, the sort of ambiguity has to do with this question condition. It says that the expensive sex will be produced by the individuals in better condition. What does that mean? Better condition. Better condition of what? Better condition when? And so people have measured condition in a variety of ways, and the black bars indicate sort of positive support for the Trivers-Willard hypothesis with a bunch of different characteristics, age or weight or dominance or whatever kind of season that they thought might actually influence condition. What seems to happen, though, is that the condition that is measured is the condition right around conception. It's not the condition of the females at birth. That doesn't have any bearing on things. It's not really the condition of females during gestation, although that matters a little bit more. But it's the condition of females at the time of conception that results in, 80% of the cases supporting the Trivers-Willard hypothesis. Now, how? It's known that extra glucose available to the developing embryo favors growth of male embryos compared to female embryos. And maybe that correlates with the condition of the female. So she's able to provide more glucose as a sort of growth support. So high-fat diets of females, which might increase her physical condition, also also increase glucose levels and favor the development of male embryos. Blastocysts, before they've actually been planted, male and female blastocysts are sending out different signals, and so it's possible that mom can detect those signals that are sent out differently by males and females and react to them, in a way that might lead to the Trivers-Willard effect. So it's really kind of unknown. There are a lot of things where, for example, in horses, it's known that if you increase the sort of foraging condition, give the mare a big sort of food bonus at the time of mating, that you tend to get a few more stallion colts than mare colts, which then would fit in with this notion. And since you have a lot of economic value in producing males or females, depending on what you're trying to produce, they've done a lot of sort of experimentation to try to determine whether this would work. And so you can increase the probability of getting a male by changing the reproductive, or changing the nutritional status of mom. Yeah.
So does this overshadow the hypothesis that a larger male father would produce a male son? Or
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I know what you mean. This is alternative.
it's alternative?
Yeah, I mean, it could go the same way though, because, so it might be still advantageous for a stallion to be large, okay? But mom might produce large boy colts in order to take advantage of the fact that that she can do this. Okay, so you can have them both happening at the same time, but they don't have to necessarily be an alternative or instead of, or one explains it and the other one doesn't.
So there's always an interplay.
There's always an interplay.
Okay.
So we don't know exactly like how it's happening.
We don't know how this is
It
happening. Yeah, this is the thing, is that this is a hypothesis is that it's probably to do with sort of circulating glucose levels that are available to the very early developing embryo that might cause selective implantation or selective abortion of one sex or the other. And I think with that I will quit and tell you to be sure to bring writing implements and